Before I started cutting the red oak, which was hundreds of dollars of lumber, I used this cheap wood strapping to make a prototype, to make sure I understood what the angles were and what distances made sense to make sure I cleared the ledge.
The key to having the handrail removable is the use of a tapered threaded insert nut. This means that the bolt can come in and out without having to worry about tearing the wood fibers in the stud. So just to demonstrate how that works with a piece of wood, this would be your stud. Use your drill and drill a 5/16 inch hole into your stud through the drywall, and then take your threaded nut and then place it into the hole that you've just drilled in the stud, and then take an Allen key, an Allen wrench, and tighten it into the stud until the flange rests across the face of the stud. That is where you're then going to take your bracket for your handrail and use a bolt, and use that bolt to screw and tighten the handrail bracket. The bracket has to be centered has to be in the middle of the stud. So first take your bracket and make sure it's flush against the wall and flush against the handrail. Then find the stud. You can tell where the stud is by the yellow light that turns on in the middle. So we've got the bracket in roughly the right spot. We just center the hole directly over that, and then we mark it with a pencil. Having marked it with a pencil, then we can I'm using a screw just to make sure the drill will find the hole easily. And then I've taken my 5/16 drill bit, put masking tape on it to make sure that the length corresponds to the length of the bolt that will be going in. And then you want to drill completely level. I'll take the wood now, and I need to tighten that up. So the hole's been drilled. So now I take the tapered threaded insert and I can put it in the hole and use the Allen key to tighten it up. And the flange is wider than the hole, so you'll have to get through the drywall to the wood. So it has to be a bit countersunk into the drywall. Once it catches the wood, you'll feel a bit different. And then keep tightening it. Take out the Allen key, put the bracket in, and then you can tighten up the bolt. For this wooden handrail, I use dowels to join together the wood at the different angles. And the shape of the handrail is rounded except for the bottom, which is flat. So you can see it's flat on the bottom, and it's a round profile on the top, which made it difficult to do these joints, so I'd like to show you how I did that. I've already built the handrail, but I want to show you how I connected these angled pieces. So this is pretty much the same angle as at the top of the stairs. So the question is, how do I take these angles and use dowels to join them together when it's very difficult to clamp or arrange them because of the profile of the handrail and the angle of the cut. So I first tried to use this inexpensive dowel jig, and the difficulty is that I can't rest right against it, and if I do rest against it, I don't have the benefit of the 90-degree angle. It's going to be difficult to clamp, And then another issue is it only has one hole for each size of dowel, and I need 2 holes because I thought it'd be more secure with 2. So I purchased this dowel jig, and it has 2 benefits. The first benefit is that, well, maybe 3. The first benefit is it's a clamping mechanism, so it easily clamps. And the second advantage is that it has the ability to do 2 holes close together. So once I set it up, I don't have to take it apart and set it up a second time. I can just set it up once. So the question is, how do I make this work with these pieces? Because even here, I'm going to have to clamp it. I'll just spread it apart. When you turn this, the sides move equally, so the holes will always center the wood. Just a bit more. There. So you can see I can have it lying flush against the this surface here, which will mean that my dowels enter the wood at 90 degrees. But you can also see that I can clamp it on the sides. But there's still this issue of the fact that it could be slightly different, and I need it to be exactly the same for both sides. So how do I go about doing that? So as I mentioned, using this measurement here, you can see that the width I'm looking for is about 16 millimeters. And I don't really care too much whether it's a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left. I just have to be consistent with both pieces, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. So it has to be at 90 degrees. So the best tool I have for that is just a speed square. And I do it on this side so I have a bit more surface area pushing against the flat bottom of the handrail. And so then I'm just going to draw a line and make sure your pencil's sharp. So now I have that width. So then I can take my calipers here, and I can mark off the other distance. And again, I have it faced this way now, so I have a little more bearing on it. There's the mark, but I'm just going to go a smidge past that because I have to be able to see it on both sides of the jig, the doweling jig. Moved a bit there. Okay, so you can see I have 2 parallel lines on my piece of wood. So I need exactly the same on the other piece. So I'm going to just carry those lines over on the bottom. And then I'm going to take the piece here and make sure it's perfectly lined up all the way around. Make sure it's all perfectly lined up. Okay, and I'm going to just transfer those points across. All right, so now they're on both. So now I can do the same thing with this piece of wood. Part of the handrail, I can get my speed square lined up on those little points that I'd made. Draw my line and then switch it so I have the speed square against the wood. And now you can see I have the lines lined up, and it's going to work as far as aligning it. Okay? Just as a double check, you can carry those lines through to the top. Just show them coming over the top and under the bottom. You can see them on the bottom. So then when I join it up, I make sure that these line up on the bottom, and then when I twist it around, I make sure they line up at the top. The next step is to take the dowel jig and make sure you're using the right size dowels. In my case, it's 5/16. I don't know if you can see that, but it's 5/16. So they both are 5/16, and that's the big advantage. I only have to do this once. So I make sure they're both tightened on. just give them just a little nudge to make sure that they're not going to go anywhere. Just a little bit. All right, so it's all set up. So now I can put this on here, and I can make sure that it is aligned with my pencil marks, so I know it's straight up and down. Okay, but there's one other step we have to do, and we've done the up and down. We have to do the across, so I'll do that now. I haven't joined it yet. I'm just showing you about the positioning of the dowels. Here's the 5/16 dowel. It's 1.5 inches long, and the point I'm making here is that it's okay to have it lower. It's not good to have it high, because if you put it in high, it may poke out the ends. It may poke out the ends, whereas if it's down lower, it's going to go into the meat of the wood. So if anything, rather than having it centered perfectly on the piece of wood, it's probably better to have it lower. You can see on the doweling jig, there's alignment lines inside here. There's 2 of them, 1 for each hole, and this will help me align as I go across my other lines. Here it is. I've got it resting against there, and I'm just going to draw a line there. So I know it is parallel with the bottom. And so now you can see my 2 pieces are ready to be joined up and drilled. Okay, I presume at this point you've got these 2 lines lined up. And so I hope you can see that. But what I'm doing is I'm lining up. So that cross line is lining up with the bottom hole marking. And the other side, you can see I didn't have the width perfect, but you can see it's parallel. As long as it's parallel on both sides, we're in good shape. Okay? But you just take your time. There, I'll just adjust it some more. You want this to be as perfect as you can, and then tighten it up. Okay, what I've done at this point is I have put on the vise of the doweling jig so that the horizontal line is lined up with that bottom point right there. There's the horizontal line. And then I can see, I don't know if you can see it, but I can see just a little bit of my pencil there. I can see a lot of my pencil there, and I want to make sure it's perfectly parallel. That's pretty good. Okay, so that's just before we start to drill. So just make sure it's good and tight. All right. So I've now put the tape on it, and I've done about 65 millimeters. So that's 40 millimeters for this depth, plus 25 to give me more than half of that. So that's my drill bit depth for me. Just as a double check, you can carry those lines through to the top. Just show them coming over the top and under the bottom. You can see them on the bottom. So then when I join it up, I make sure that these line up on the bottom, and then when I twist it around, I make sure they line up at the top. Okay, just one more time. I've made sure that the line here lines up with the center of the hole as marked on the doweling jig. And I've also made sure that this line on this side is parallel. It'd be beautiful if it just lined up perfectly, but it doesn't. So now I'm ready to drill. Double check that it's tight. Double check that it is flush or flat against the wood. This black part is flat against the wood, and that your lines all match up, okay, before you start drilling. Put your drill at high speed and start drilling down to the marker. And what I do is I start very high, and I do them both a little bit and pull it out. The reason I alternate is because then the holes have been established before things get kind of crazy. Okay, done. I tried to make a jig for this, and I just found it was too difficult, so I just did it all by hand. And there's the get the things out of there. There's the holes, and they're right on that line here, and they're a little close to that side, so we have to make sure we're close to that side when we do the other half. Okay, here's the other piece of wood. And when I said make sure it's close to the other side, it may seem like a hard thing to do, but it's at a different angle now. The first one, if you recall, was this way, right? And now this one is poking out the other way. And so in both cases, the lower side lined up perfectly with the black part of this doweling jig, but the top, there was a space, and it's got to be parallel, that space, okay? And then I'm making sure that the line here lines up perfectly with that. Okay, and now I'm going to drill it out. Just double check that nothing's shifted while I was showing you all that, and making sure that it is flush along here. Okay, I'm going to drill it again, starting off fast. Not going too deep the first couple of times. And then finishing it off. Okay. So you can see now the holes have been cut, and they're both kind of towards the top here rather than towards the bottom. They're not perfectly centered, but they're consistent. And it's the consistency that's important. They don't have to be in the center. They can be out a millimeter or two. But the point is that they're out on the same side. That's what's important. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the dowels in and see how it lines up. When you place the wood into the doweling jig, you want to make sure that these lines run parallel to the black part of it. And you can see on the other side, this one is running right along the side. And the second line is this line here. You want it to go right to the point there so that you know you'll be drilling in the center of that line. Okay, there's no marking on the other side, but as long as you have this line perpendicular to the flat base and you have this line perpendicular to that line, everything should be square. Here's a picture of the wood after I have drilled the holes. You can see that these two lines here correspond to the black part of the doweling jig, which is this part right here, this black part. So you can see there and there that that is lining up to there and there. And then you can see in the doweling jig, this spot here corresponds to this line right here. And my holes that I drilled were a little bit to the right here, but then correspondingly on the other one, because I had the piece of wood in the opposite direction, these are a little bit to the left, which means when I join them, the piece of wood, at least on the exterior, will line up perfectly. Just one thing I found useful that maybe would horrify woodworkers, but I sanded down the dowels so they're easier to pull together. If you leave them at their full width of 5/16 and the holes at 5/16, it's very hard to join them, and because it's at an angle, it's difficult to clamp them together or press them. So by sanding them down, you can provide, it's easier to get them off and on, And in fact, I glued them with the sand down dowels, and it seemed to come together well. Thank you.
In order to varnish the handrail, I wanted to do it all at once, and I didn't want to have to flip it over. So what I did is I put a screw through a piece of wood and then into one of the existing holes for the brackets. And so the handrail is not going to balance because of the different pieces. It wants to roll over to the right hand side. So what I did here is I took a long piece of wood and screwed a screw into it and screw into the wood, which makes sure it wouldn't flip over.